In this episode, we take a very practical turn and talk about the part of certification prep that feels boring until it causes a real problem. Registration details, exam day policies, and the kind of time management that keeps you calm instead of rushed. Many strong learners lose points not because they do not know the material, but because they show up stressed, misread instructions, or get thrown off by rules they did not expect. When you are preparing for a security architecture exam, you want your brain spending its limited energy on reasoning through scenarios, not on worrying about whether you brought the right identification or whether a break is allowed. Planning the logistics is not a distraction from learning because it protects the learning you already did by reducing avoidable friction on test day. By building familiarity with the process and practicing a simple timing approach, you remove surprise from the environment and give yourself a cleaner, steadier mental space to demonstrate what you know. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at Cyber.Author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Before you ever pick a date, it helps to understand the sequence of steps that typically happens from deciding to test to sitting down at the workstation. You usually start by confirming your eligibility and then creating or using an existing account with the exam program and the testing provider, which is the organization that runs the actual appointment and test center network. After that, you choose your delivery method, such as testing in a center or testing in a proctored environment where you are observed remotely, if that option is available for your exam. Each delivery method has different rules about your workspace, items you can bring, and how check-in works, so the choice affects more than convenience. Once you schedule, you receive confirmations and policy links, and those messages matter because they contain the details you will rely on later. Treat those confirmations as part of your study materials because they define the conditions under which your knowledge will be measured. The biggest policy surprises tend to come from identification, name matching, and timing, so those are worth extra attention. Testing programs typically require specific forms of identification, often government-issued, and the name on your appointment must match your identification exactly in the way the policy defines. A mismatch can lead to delays, extra verification steps, or being turned away, which is the kind of stress you do not want right before a long exam. This means you should check your profile name well in advance and fix it early if there is any discrepancy, including middle names, hyphens, or suffixes. It can feel picky, but the staff or proctor is following a rule, not making a personal judgment. When you handle this early, you turn a potential exam day crisis into a simple administrative step. You also want to understand the basic flow of a test center appointment, because uncertainty about the process can create unnecessary anxiety. Most centers require you to arrive early for check-in, which includes verifying identification, capturing a signature, and storing personal items in a locker. You may be scanned with a metal detector wand, and you may be asked to roll up sleeves or turn pockets out because the environment is controlled to protect the exam. At the workstation, you are often given simple instructions about what you can do if you need assistance, such as raising your hand, and you may be provided with an erasable noteboard or similar scratch surface. None of this is meant to intimidate you, but it can feel intense if you have never experienced it. When you picture the process ahead of time, it becomes routine rather than surprising. Remote proctoring can feel more convenient, but it has its own category of surprises, mostly related to environment rules and technology stability. You may be required to show the entire room with a camera, clear the desk, and remove items that would be fine at a test center, like extra monitors, papers, or even certain kinds of accessories. You may have to close applications, disable notifications, or ensure no one enters the room during the exam, because the proctor must be confident you are alone and not receiving help. If your connection drops or your camera fails, the interruption can break your concentration even if the issue is resolved. That does not mean remote testing is bad, but it does mean you should treat setup and practice as part of your plan, not as a last-minute task. A quiet, stable environment is a form of exam readiness, just like knowing the material. Cancellation, rescheduling, and lateness policies are another area where surprises happen, especially for learners balancing work obligations. Programs often have deadlines after which fees increase or changes are not allowed, and those deadlines can be measured in days or hours, not just in vague terms like a week before. If you wait until the last minute to read these rules, you may find yourself stuck with a date that no longer fits your life. The safe approach is to schedule your exam with a buffer window, meaning a period in your calendar that can handle a work emergency without forcing you into a policy problem. You should also plan transportation and arrival time with extra margin, because traffic, parking, and building entry can be unpredictable. When you build slack into the plan, you prevent a logistics issue from becoming a performance issue. Now we move into time management during the exam itself, which is less about being fast and more about being consistent. A long exam can trick you into spending too much time early because you feel fresh, and then you discover later that you have less time than you expected. A simple approach is to think in averages, meaning you have a rough amount of time per question based on the total time and number of questions. You do not need to calculate it obsessively, but you do want a sense of what normal pacing feels like. The goal is not to rush, because rushed reading leads to careless mistakes, but to avoid getting trapped in one hard question for too long. When you feel stuck, it is usually better to choose the best option you can, flag it if the system allows, and keep moving. An important part of pacing is recognizing which questions deserve deeper attention and which ones should be answered quickly. Some questions are built around a single concept with clear distractors, and if you recognize the concept, you can answer confidently without overthinking. Other questions involve a scenario with multiple constraints where you must choose the best architectural decision, and those deserve more careful reading. Beginners sometimes spend equal time on every question, which wastes time on easy items and steals time from the hard ones. A better habit is to read the STEM carefully, identify what is being asked, and decide quickly whether it is straightforward or complex. If it is straightforward, answer and move on. If it is complex, slow down slightly and use a disciplined method to evaluate options. Over the full exam, this selective focus improves both speed and accuracy. Reading discipline is a hidden time management skill, because many time problems are actually reading problems. When you skim, you miss keywords like best, most appropriate, primary, or first, and you may ignore constraints like budget, legacy systems, regulatory demands, or operational limits. Those constraints usually determine the correct answer, so missing them is like solving the wrong puzzle. A practical technique is to pause after reading the STEM and restate the question in your own words, focusing on the decision being requested. Then glance back at the STEM to confirm the constraints before you look at the options. This takes a few seconds, but it prevents the much larger time loss of debating answers based on a misunderstood prompt. The exam rewards careful interpretation more than it rewards quick guessing. Another time management challenge is emotional, not technical, and it shows up when you see a question that feels unfamiliar. The moment you think, "I do not know this," your stress rises, and stress makes reading less accurate, which makes the question feel even harder. The antidote is to remember that many questions are answerable through reasoning even when you do not recognize every term. You can often eliminate options that are too operational, too vague, or mismatched to the role of an architect, and then choose the best remaining fit. Also, unfamiliar does not always mean impossible. Sometimes it simply means the question is phrased differently than your study materials. If you train yourself to stay calm and apply a consistent elimination approach, you will recover points you would otherwise lose to panic. Calm is a performance tool, and time management helps you stay calm. Break policies can also affect timing and comfort, and this is another area where knowing the rules reduces distraction. Some exams allow breaks with strict conditions, and some do not, and even when breaks exist, the clock may keep running. If you assume you can take a break and you cannot, you may be uncomfortable or distracted later, so it helps to plan your hydration and nutrition accordingly. If breaks are allowed but the clock continues, you need to decide whether a break is worth the time cost, because a short reset might improve accuracy enough to be worth it. The key point is that you should not make this decision for the first time while stressed during the exam. Decide ahead of time how you will handle comfort needs, and you remove another source of uncertainty. The final set of surprises often involves what you can bring and what you can do during the exam, especially with personal items and notes. Testing environments usually prohibit personal electronics, papers, and study materials, and they may restrict jewelry, outerwear, or even certain kinds of accessories. If you are used to studying with a phone nearby or wearing a smartwatch, the sudden absence can feel strange, so plan to leave those items behind or store them as required. You also cannot assume you will be able to write down a lot of notes at the start, because the scratch materials provided are limited and the rules may control when you can use them. The best approach is to practice without relying on external aids, because that matches the exam environment. When your study habits match the exam conditions, the transition on exam day is smoother. To make all of this practical, you can build a simple readiness checklist in your head that covers scheduling, identity, environment, and pacing, even though you are not writing anything down here. You want to confirm your account information, ensure your identification matches, understand arrival and check-in expectations, and choose the delivery method that best fits your life and workspace stability. You want to know the change policies so you are not trapped by deadlines, and you want a pacing approach that keeps you moving while still reading carefully. You also want to normalize the controlled environment so it does not feel like a personal challenge, just a standard procedure. When these pieces are handled early, your attention can shift back to the content where it belongs. The result is fewer surprises, lower stress, and a much better chance that your score reflects your real understanding. As we wrap up, remember that exam logistics and time management are not separate from learning, because they directly affect how well you can access what you know under pressure. A well-prepared learner handles the administrative steps early, chooses a testing format intentionally, and studies in a way that does not depend on comforts that will not exist on test day. A well-managed exam pace is built on careful reading, selective depth, and the willingness to move forward when a question becomes a time sink. Policies about identification, arrival, and permitted items are not negotiable in the moment, so your best defense is awareness and planning. When you remove uncertainty about process, you create a calmer test experience, and calm supports clearer thinking. That is how you execute registration, policies, and timing without surprises, and it is one of the most underrated ways to protect the effort you have already invested.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.